of artificial intelligence. The first is Samuel Hammond, senior economist at the Foundation for American Innovation. The second is Dr. Keegan McBride, who is an assistant professor at Oxford University and government, artificial intelligence, and policy. And I wanted to kick off our discussion today with a broad question. As I noted in the invitation for this event, there's been increasing controversy and skepticism and even alarm about the implications of artificial intelligence for mankind, including there have been several statements written warning against moving ahead precipitously with artificial intelligence. And I'd like to start with Sam and ask him, how warranted are these fears? Are they justified? Are they legitimate? Or is it kind of an artificial scare?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. So I think there's a nuanced take on this where there's a division in what people talk about when they talk about AI safety and AI risk between the folks who think that there's something truly existential that maybe is coming down the pike and isn't represented in current models, but is on if you just extrapolate the curve, we'll get there soon. And then folks who are more concerned about deep fakes, bias, disinformation, algorithmic discrimination, and all these sort of things that are familiar to us in other domains. We've had debates for 5 or 10 years now on social media's effect on our media environment, on all kinds of ways that technology can help or hurt various existing inequities. Those things are kind of ever present, and I think they have a risk of distracting from these bigger picture risks. So the way I tend to look at this is, there's a thesis in deep learning and machine learning that scale is all you need, and what that refers to is the fact that these deep neural networks that are suddenly taking off, they were kind of the backwater of the research, AI research for decades. And really what happened was we suddenly made them a lot deeper and they got a lot better without really doing anything special. And we're learning now that, there are these scaling laws associated with the technology, and we can extrapolate out and we can see like right now, so GPT-3, the predecessor to the current ChatGPT, costs about $5 million to train. GPT-4 costs on the order of $100 million to train. The next iteration will probably cost in the order of $1 billion to train, and $10 billion after that. So we're sort of hitting a temporary wall right now because of the cost. But as soon as these costs begin to come down, and as soon as investment starts pouring in, as it already is, we're going to quickly climb this scaling curve and discover what forms of new emergent powers and behaviors these models can have when pushed to their limits. And that is, at the very best, an unknown. But in the worst case scenario, it's a short timeline to having digital brains that are as powerful or more powerful than humans.
Keegan, I would like to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I will just start off by being fairly straightforward and saying that I'm absolutely not scared about AI bringing around the end of the world in the near future. I don't think we're heading towards any sort of artificial intelligence induced Armageddon. It's a lot of marketing. It's a lot of, I would say, business interests pursuing this motif or narrative, because what better thing to be creating than something that can bring about the end of the world, in the sense that it makes it seem more powerful and more innovative than perhaps that it is. That being said, where I do think there's valid concerns is that artificial intelligence is essentially a tool to augment human intelligence. What I mean by this is that it allows us to do things more efficiently and more effectively. There's a great scientist out of Stanford back in the 60s and 70s, Douglas Engelbart, who did a whole lot of work on human intelligence augmentation, was doing things There's the mother of all demos from 50, 60 years ago at this point, where they're doing real-time video conferencing, they're doing document sharing. And the idea was, how can we use technology to enable humans to solve the increasingly complex problems that we are encountering in this globalizing world? That's very good, especially when we think about it from the perspective like, okay, yes, we can become more productive, we can solve problems better and more efficiently than ever before. But the flip side of this is that it also means bad people can do bad things more efficiently and more effectively than ever before. So if you're an authoritarian ruler, artificial intelligence absolutely empowers you to become more authoritarian. It allows you to be more effective with control, with surveillance. And this is where I have perhaps more fears than anywhere else. But for the most part, we're also still at a very early stage in all of this, in the sense that LLMs, what people are talking about, it's still fairly new in this process, but of course we've been working on AI for decades at this point. It's not like this happened overnight. And so when we're hearing a lot about, in the next 5 years, we're going to have a super general intelligence or whatever, it ignores lots and lots and lots of history that have got us up to this point. And they tried to make it seem as if this almost happened overnight, and it just hasn't.
One of the questions that's percolating out there, and it's not an easy one to answer, but is and there both of you raised points that I'd like to dive into. But first, I wonder about the question of consciousness. I'll begin with you, Sam, and then Keegan. Does either of you think that these machines can or will achieve consciousness that will crack the code of the mind-body conundrum? Sam?
I don't think there's any evidence that current large language models have any kind of inner experience. They've certainly been trained to deny that they have any inner experience. I tend to remain agnostic on this question. I think we don't know enough about how consciousness emerges. It seems to be a kind of video game engine model that our brain constructs to help us navigate the world. And there are people who theorize that if you have a sufficiently advanced agent that has control that goes beyond being a thermostat, right? A thermostat is able to adjust itself, to adjust the air conditioning to get back to a set point. Agents take agency over future states of the world and can have preferences over those states of the world and can manipulate the world to achieve their ends. And that's the leap that we're making with some of these more autonomous forms of artificial intelligence. But when you start to think about, taking a large language model, taking a large, making them multimodal, so they have audio and visual, giving them a planning system, and then adding some degree of recursion so they can have sort of self-awareness. I don't know if we called that consciousness in the human sense, but we will reach a point where the lines start to blur.
Keegan, what's your take on this issue?
I mean, I think we're still a long way away from developing any sort of general intelligence in the sense that people understand it, around consciousness, this sort of thing. I don't think it will actually be possible, but two, if it were possible, we're still not close, because the technology as it is currently, it's not as powerful as people are making it out to be. There's a whole lot of marketing behind it. Not to say it's not cool, not to say that it's not innovative, but it's still a very long way away from this perspective of like developing some sort of consciousness or generalized intelligence on its own. That being said, I think it can certainly trick people into thinking that it's conscious and having some sort of intelligence. We've already seen it happen. We've seen engineers working for companies say that they believe they had created some sort of general intelligence that had consciousness. But just because a few engineers think it does or has happened doesn't mean it is or it will happen in the near future.
Yeah, the reason one of the reasons I asked was there was a spate of news articles in the Washington Post and New York Times about precisely this issue, where the machine allegedly advised the engineer to divorce his wife and so forth. But I'm gleaning that both of you think that there was more smoke than fire in that instance?
Well, this may be just a philosophical difference between myself and Keegan, but I tend to think that the human brain is based on relatively simple principles. The brain isn't designed; it grows in the process of child development, and it grows from a very simple rule set. Like you can't describe everything in our brain in our DNA. There's just not enough information there. And the way it grows is through these neural networks that are much more complicated than our artificial neural networks. But we have reason to believe that there are some isomorphisms between them, meaning some degrees of equivalence, right? So, there's been some recent studies using the image diffusion models where they put participants in an fMRI machine, and just by analyzing blood flow, the fMRI data of the brain, are able to reconstruct the images that the people are looking at. And so, there is an eerie or uncanny similarity when you look at some of these image models between what I see when I dream, right? And so I wouldn't put it past that we've stumbled on a kind of universal algorithm that is something very, if not exactly the same as what our brain does, is similar enough that we can't rule out that there is some connection here to consciousness.
That's interesting. I was just reading an article, an interview with Roger Penrose, who does not think that the brain, that it can be quantified. Keegan, I wonder what your take is.
No, I think Sam's right that we probably just have a disagreement here. I don't want to get into the whole sort of philosophy around like what is consciousness, what is not consciousness, what is existence, and so on. But I do think that if you look at how many of these AI systems, and let's also take a step back, right? Like at the moment, most people are talking about LLMs, but there's much more to artificial intelligence than just LLMs and just this specific type of machine learning algorithms. People are trying to do things across the board when it comes to AI. You have, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, you have Q learning, reinforcement learning, you have you have symbolic sort of stuff. You have people who are trying to build a more very like general approach to artificial intelligence. You have those who are building like more narrow applications and yada, yada, yada. So we also have a definitional problem. Like, what are we even talking about? But even if you're going to take the most advanced system that we have today and sort of extrapolate out over the next X amount of years, the sort of computational power that we need, the amount of data that we have to make these things work, it's an order of magnitude less than what I think would be sort of like required to move us into this possible, if it's even technically possible, which I'm not necessarily sure that it is.
All right, let's cut to a more practical question, which I hope it's not too unfair, but in thinking about AI, are we looking, and I'll start with Sam, since you were talking about innovation, are we looking at a wipeout of jobs in the United States and elsewhere?
So the classic economist answer would be to say no, that this is called the lump of labor fallacy. And any time we've had innovation in the past, including sort of fundamental general purpose technologies like electricity, like agriculture, moving to mechanization, new jobs get created, right? The wealth and productivity and the labor savings that those technologies create become income for someone, and that income is in turn spent back into the economy, and that creates new sources of demand for new jobs. That being said, I think people are still unprepared for how quickly this technology is going to come and why it will look different from previous industrial revolution style events. Essentially every one of these transitions has been squeezed into a shorter and shorter time frame. And our institutions may just not be prepared for compressing a century of progress into a few months, right? And that is easy to model. You don't even need to get to an AI that we can say definitively is superhuman or has consciousness. You just need it to get expert level on tasks and to be a zero shot or few shot learner on ththings that humans do, right? And so there's a forecasting platform, Mercatus, where people place bets and forecast when they think events will occur. And right now, their forecast for AGI, which they operationalize as an AI that is general enough to compete with college-educated workers, is 2026. And they have a strong AGI definition, which is 2031 or 2032. And that's when it transitions into having robot control and so forth, and then it starts impacting the physical economy. So, they're going to be tipping points where broad swaths of the economy become, not just augmentable by AI, but directly replaceable by AI. And then humans have to start thinking about what is our deeper comparative advantage.
Keegan, I wonder what is your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, I think this is going to be kind of a recurring theme throughout this panel. But I mean, look, there are certainly people who are talking about the fact that AI might replace a lot of jobs. I mean, here at Oxford, we have some professors who wrote a paper on, like what jobs might be automatable in the near future. And they said something to the effect of 45% of jobs in America would be what they consider high-risk jobs of automation, sort of era of computerization. I don't subscribe to this. I mean, there's a really great paper by Out There that talks about, why are there still so many jobs, the history and future of workplace automation. We have seen this for hundreds of years, technological process. We know that there's a pattern to this. Certainly, new technological innovations can transform the labor market. Maybe some people will have their jobs transformed. But the other side of this is the productivity of the average worker is going to be able to increase when it comes to, like, if you're applying AI, it will make you more effective. It will make you more productive. This is, a net benefit. There's going to be more things to do. But not only that, people who traditionally have, let's say, lower income, lower skill sets, lower education, they themselves will also be augmentable by AI. So you're going to see a sort of raising of the lowest levels of the workforce anyway, to be able to do things that they currently can't do. So I'm not particularly worried about it, I would say. And then there's the other part of this, which is just the realist perspective, right? Like, what would it actually mean if some sorts of new AI system was to come in and rapidly transform, like an entire level of the economy, right? We have people who still don't use computers in their businesses. There are a lot of businesses that aren't able to do basic data analytics. There are a lot of businesses that are still struggling to digitalize. And all of a sudden we're expecting, or some are expecting, like X% of the economy to just disappear basically because of AI taking their jobs. I can see in theory, like, why this is an attractive idea, but it's one that we've heard for decades and it hasn't really played out. And the other part of it is I don't see how in reality it would actually happen, because which government, for example, is going to let a new technology wipe out, let's say white collar middle class employees or something? It's just, I don't see how it's possible, even from this perspective, even if technologically it is. Sam,
actually, if you guys disagree, that's always my dream as a moderator. Too much agreement is bad. And I also want to note that we have a number of people watching this, I can see on my screen, and I hope you will not be shy about posting a question. Particularly if you're dissatisfied with mine, I am more than happy to pose yours to our panelists. Sam, I'm wondering, what do you think? Do you think that's too optimistic a scenario? Keegan has talked a lot about augmenting the skill set. Do you think it's too rosy a scenario?
I think both are scenarios, at least in this context, are rosy. We're just sort of debating on the margins whether everything is augmenting or there will be some places for replacement, right? So, there was a transitional period where chess playing AIs were better with a human partner than acting alone. But that was a short liminal period, and then quickly the chess playing robots became far superior to humans, like double their ELO ratings. And I think we'll see similar trends in other sectors. Right now, I imagine in the coming years, like this year and next year, we'll start to see medical providers, doctors and nurses having GPT-like medical assistance for diagnosis. You feed in your blood work and a description of your symptoms, and it will give you a really good, plausible diagnosis. And at first, those will be augmenting. It will help people manage more patients and have more accuracy, and not make mistakes when they're tired and so forth. But at some point, we'll cross a threshold where it's actually a harm to the patient to have a doctor in the loop at all, right? And we'll see that across different sectors as well. It's not a question of whether governments will let this happen. We're a market-based economy. We have a vibrant private equity sector, for instance. And when we did have a last sort of boost of productivity, it was in the late 90s. That was from a wave of computerization, and we had we got a lot of culture out of that, like Office Space, the famous movie, like the sort of stories about downsizing, and there's no stopping that process. People will lobby, right? I'm reminded of I think it was Marriott or Hilton, one of the major hospitals in Nevada, announced that they were going to replace their front desk worker with an Alexa style chatbot that you could talk to. And the hospitality union protested and said that they're going to strike over it. And that's not really going to stop that, right? That if anything, that might accelerate the adoption of technology.
Keegan, I should give you the last word on this one, if you have anything.
No, I think part of this is, you say governments, I think you were maybe a little bit too hands off on that, because we do see a differing emerging regulatory regimes between, like, let's say Europe and between the US. Certainly Europe has a much stronger tradition of like labor protection of unions, particularly in like Scandinavian countries. Now with the AI Act coming out, you're seeing specific high risk applications related to AI, either be banned or have to have a human in the loop and things like this. So it depends on which direction governments want to sort of push this. I think I agree that some jobs will be transformed or go away. This is inevitable. But I think like on a net, or sort of at the end of the day, I don't see this wiping out like a big part of the workforce or anything like that. Even if some jobs are transformed or do go away to this automation, at least at the moment, I don't see it being rising to the level that some people might expect. But certainly changes are coming, and there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. Like, this train has already left, and there will be some reckoning ahead. Yeah.
How confident are you that, let's look at Western democracies, how confident are you about their ability, say here in the US or in the UK, to grasp and handle this revolutionary development? I'll begin with you, Sam.
Not high, I'll put it that way. If we were having internet safety discussions in like circa 2000, we would be talking about cyberbullying or cybercrime, credit card theft. We wouldn't have thought that the internet would lead to a technology of mass mobilization that would cause an Arab Spring and a crisis of authority across Western democracy, right? It's the tsunami of information that the internet unleashed. In any individual case wasn't a harm or wasn't a bad thing, but in aggregate was very destabilizing. And I tend to think AI, and this is probably one of the biggest sources of sort of neglected risk. There's a lot of focus on super intelligence that wakes up and takes over the world. But before we get to that point, we're going to have systems that put a huge amount of power in the hands of ordinary citizens and really lower the learning curve to cause damage. Whether that's through obvious things like deep fakes. There's a growing issue of deep fake pornography, where people create fake images of their spurned lovers, and you can imagine all kinds of things going haywire from that. To date, we've been focused on, we as in the Western democracies have been focused on making AI backward compatible with our existing political concerns and commitments. So much of the disinformation focus is a carryover from the social media wars and social media debates. And I tend to worry that we are, relatively brittle institutionally. We're mature democracies. We complain that we can't build transmission lines, and our agencies are much more bureaucratic than they used to be. AI will usher in a need for institutional evolution like we haven't seen since at least the New Deal era, and probably much more than that. And so it's going to be much more than what particular regulatory framework the FTC or NIST adopts. That's thinking way too small ball, and it's often too backward looking.
So do you want a new government agency in effect?
I want all new government agencies, right? We're the U.S. is running on firmware that was established in the post-war, right? We have the Administrative Procedures Act, which is 75 years old. Our social security numbers are from 1935. We're a far cry from Estonia, where they have the most advanced e-government in the world.
Yeah.
Right? And when I look at by analogy the way the internet had rocked the foundations of sort of legitimacy in government and things like that, I think we've been moving through a slow process of right-sizing our institutions and recognizing the amount of proceduralism and kludge that has slowed them down. And we're going to have to clear that dead wood really quickly.
Keegan.
Yeah, I mean, basically a lot of agreement with Samuel here. So I lived in Estonia for the past 8 years. I've been doing quite a lot of research and work here on digital government, and absolutely, this is one of the biggest risks that the United States has, because we are so far behind when it comes to digitalization compared to China, compared to anyone in the European Union, really, compared to a lot of countries in South America. Many households don't have internet. We don't have a sort of good understanding of our data infrastructure related to digital identities, to digital services. It's a mess, for lack of a better word. And this is the thing with AI, right? Like, to sort of, if we think about it from a geopolitical perspective, of course, you have the sort of like state interactions, but a lot of the benefits are going to come down to how well can you use this technology to sort of like mobilize your resources internally to improve your economy, to improve your productivity, to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your state and the bureaucratic organizations and so on. And we are at a very large disadvantage in the United States for being able to do that effectively, which is weird when you consider the fact that we actually own basically the entire infrastructure and supply chain related to AI. From the deep sea cables that are moving data around the world and running the internet, to our private sector companies owning a majority of the world's data centers like Amazon or Microsoft, to the sort of advanced manufacturing techniques that we need now with the chips regulation coming into effect and trying to bring back some of this capacity and push China away. We actually have a lot of competence and capacity here. So we will have these, unique leverage points, let's say, to try to build up and keep our advantage. But we also have to be able to use it internally. And then this is where we get into the conflict between sort of like authoritarian versus democratic understandings of AI and how it can be implemented. And personally, I think that at its core, artificial intelligence is sort of an inherently centralizing and authoritarian type technology. We're trying to build against that, via standards and sort of norms and things like that. But absolutely, our geopolitical rivals have an advantage when it comes to the data they can use to train, how they can use and apply this sort of stuff that might give them disadvantage in when it comes to the use of AI.
We have a hard-nosed question from Ben Haas, who asks, he says, it appears that some LLMs were rushed out to boost share prices and ensure that tech majors were not left behind. Could it be said that we already have a complex, data-driven, non-human system driving AI development outside the control of individuals and not aligned with human well-being? But it isn't an AI, it's the stock market. Sam?
Or you could just say it's the market itself, the kind of competitive dynamics that get unleashed, right? And some people call this Moloch in reference to a sort of biblical style God that we need to give a name to this force that moves history forward in a way that no one is in control. It's sort of falling down a cliff or rolling down a hill driven by market dynamics. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? There's questions whether, how to approach the big AI companies from a competition policy standpoint, right? And if you don't think AGI is near, then you'll be suspicious of companies that want to collude together or cooperate because they're going to secure some cartel or monopoly. But if you do think AGI is near and that we should slow down a bit and take our time and try to move at a pace that our institutions can adapt to, then maybe we need to resist the urge to embrace sort of market logic, race to the bottom kind of dynamics. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to sort of get some empirical consensus on what we are actually facing, because the policy prescriptions will hinge on that.
Any thoughts, Keegan? It sounds like something.
No, I mean, I think like we need to be careful of forgetting history. I mean, the foundation of the modern state has been about the collection and management of information. You see direct relationships between the development of bureaucracy and the amount of information available. As the amount of information grows, you need new machines and technologies to manage it. And then what you see over time is that the state or the nation or the government or the bureaucracy that is able to manage information more effectively and strategically leverage it more than their rivals has an advantage. For example, Prussia was very, very good at this. They had better troop movements, they had better awareness of their enemies' movements, which meant that they had an advantage on the battlefield and so on and so forth. Like AI is basically the same in the sense it's taking a lot of information, which is being generated by digital sources, and it's allowing us to digest it and use it more effectively. And we're going to see this sort of feedback loop continue to grow as long as we sort of exist within this sociological form of organization, that we have. So in this sense, I don't see this as something actually that new. Like we've been dealing with this for hundreds of years. This process of growing information and then applying it to have some sort of advantage. But that doesn't have to be negative, right? Like if you want to have a welfare state, for example, you need to know how much money people make. You need to know where they live. Are they employed or are they unemployed? This is the only way that you can start to provide them benefits. So there are some positive aspects to this. And I think it's really easy to get lost in this idea that it's all about profits in the market. And sure, to some extent it is. But part of it is also just because of how the world is structured today, which was something that happened a long time ago. It's not a popular answer, but
there's a good question from Zanera Asif, who asks, and she's heading in the direction that I was going to move as well, which is national security. She asks, are there authors or books you suggest that discuss AI in relation to democracy and geopolitics? Sam?
Apologies. I'm going to recommend the book Chip Wars. I just wanted to double check on the name of the author, by Chris Miller. It's sort of a cliche to say that data is the new oil, and I always cringe when people say that. I think the real thing is that the chips are the new oil, or chips are the new strategic asset, right? The reason Taiwan is so strategically important to both the US and China is because TSMC is the world leading manufacturer of advanced AI chips. The reason Republicans and Democrats came together to pour billions of dollars into building our own chip foundries in the US for really turning our back on an older model where we just did the design and other countries did the manufacturing, is a testament to the fact that chips and chip access to advanced semiconductors is really everything, right? Not only are transistors in everything currently, but you can imagine a near-term world, where more and more services are performed by AIs, and those AIs will, by and large, be hosted in the cloud. And so more and more of the economy will be moved into these data centers. And that makes it an incredibly important strategic asset, and one that I think will be an access point for a lot of geopolitics going forward.
Yeah, I will just continue. Jacob, you're muted.
Yeah, no, I was wondering if you had any final thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. No, I think that foreign policy just did an issue on AI and geopolitics a week or two ago, and I think most of the articles that were in that are quite good. There's Paul Schare, or don't know how to say his last name, but Scharre, and he has a book on four battlegrounds: power in the age of artificial intelligence. I think it's quite good. But also just to reiterate what Samuel said, that the real battle for AI is not the algorithms, it's not the models, it's not the business use case, it is the infrastructure behind this, because that's the only way that this works. So there will be an increasing interest in the private sector. So my colleague Billy Lehtonen here at Oxford has a book on cloud empires, which talks about this, that I would highly recommend reading, because this is absolutely key to the future of all this stuff. And it's certainly, if we look at how the national security sort of community is thinking about regulating this stuff, then hardware is definitely something that they're looking at the moment. I don't know if it's sustainable in the long run, but at least in the short term, this is somewhere where people are looking.
Well, with that, I'd like to conclude our session. I'm grateful to both Sam Hammond and Keegan McBride for joining us today for our discussion about artificial intelligence. And I'm quite sure that this will be the first and not the last time that we meet to talk about these developments. Thank you again. I'm Jacob Halbrin, editor of the National.